What happens when a K-pop idol stops pretending and starts living their truth? For years, Jo Kwon was known as the funny one, the ballad prince, the unpredictable variety show star. But behind every laugh, every dance move, and every viral moment was a story no one dared to tell. This is the journey of how Jo Kwon went from surviving the K-pop system to becoming one of South Korea's most visible LGBTQ+ voices. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why. He never looked back. In the quiet suburbs of Suwon, South Korea, a young boy named Jo Kwon was chasing dreams that felt impossibly big for a world that often seemed too small for someone like him. Born on August 28, 1989, Jo Kwon entered life in a society deeply rooted in tradition, where family honor, social conformity, and strict gender roles were more than just expectations. They were the framework that shaped every childhood, every classroom, and every future. Even as a child, Jo Kwon stood out. While other boys his age were practicing taekwondo or playing soccer, he was memorizing the choreography of iconic K-pop groups, dancing alone in his bedroom until his feet ached. He would belt out songs at school talent shows, often drawing stares, not just for his vocal talent, but for the way he moved, the way he smiled, the way he laughed. Too expressive, too dramatic, too different. At a time when South Korea's entertainment industry was dominated by hyper-masculine role models and tightly controlled idol images, there wasn't space for boys like Jo Kwon. Gender fluidity wasn't part of public conversation. LGBTQ+ representation on Korean television was almost non-existent, and when it did appear, it was often reduced to caricature or cruel punchlines. At just 13 years old, he auditioned for JYP Entertainment, one of the big three K-pop agencies at the time. Standing in that cold, fluorescent-lit room with nothing but hope in his heart and a trembling voice, he sang as if his future depended on it. And in many ways, it did. What followed next would test the limits of any young person's emotional endurance. 8 years of relentless training, 8 years of waking up before dawn, attending school, rushing to vocal lessons, dance practice, language classes, personality coaching, and late-night evaluations. 8 years of watching dozens of other trainees come and go, some leaving by choice, others being told they simply weren't good enough. And through all of this, Jo Kwon stayed. There were nights he cried himself to sleep, doubting if he would ever debut. Days when the loneliness inside those JYP practice rooms felt heavier than his own body weight. Other trainees whispered behind his back, questioning his mannerisms, mocking the way he walked or how he talked with his hands. It was as if his mere existence made people uncomfortable. But Jo Kwon learned early that survival in this industry required more than talent. It required resilience, an almost stubborn refusal to give up. And so, every morning, he showed up, he sang louder, danced harder, smiled wider, and somewhere along the way, he began turning every insult into fuel. It's impossible to overstate how groundbreaking this was for a young Korean boy at that time. In the early 2000s, LGBTQ+ rights in South Korea were virtually non-existent. Anti-discrimination laws had failed to pass. Queer youth were left without visible role models. Suicide rates among LGBTQ+ teens were among the highest in Asia. Teachers rarely intervened when students were bullied for seeming too feminine or too different. And still, there Jo Kwon stood, day after day, shaping a new narrative just by existing. Without ever needing to say the words out loud, he was offering silent representation for thousands of Korean kids watching from the sidelines. Behind the scenes, Park Jin-young, the founder of JYP Entertainment, became both mentor and mirror. Known for spotting raw, unpolished talent, JYP saw something in Jo Kwon that others often overlooked: authenticity. That rare, almost electric ability to light up a room not by fitting in, but by standing out. Yet even with that recognition, the pressure to conform remained suffocating. Jo Kwon was encouraged to adjust his tone of voice during interviews, to limit his flamboyant hand gestures, to portray an image that was more palatable for Korean audiences. His debut, if it ever came, would be carefully scripted, filtered through layers of public relations management. And still, he didn't quit. Every high note he mastered wasn't just about becoming a singer. Every dance routine he perfected wasn't just about becoming an idol. Deep inside, Jo Kwon was preparing for something larger, a lifelong fight for visibility, for freedom, for the right to be exactly who he was, without apology. By late 2007, after 8 unimaginable years, the moment finally arrived. Jo Kwon's name was on the final debut list for a new K-pop ballad group called 2AM. The official announcement was simple, almost sterile. But for Jo Kwon, it meant everything. Not just the beginning of his professional career, but the first step in a much longer, far more personal journey toward becoming one of South Korea's most visible and outspoken LGBTQ+ icons. What no one knew at the time, not his fans, not even most of his peers, was that this debut was only chapter 1. The real story, the one about fighting for LGBTQ+ acceptance in Korea and across Asia, was just beginning. And as history would show, Jo Kwon was more than ready for it. When Jo Kwon finally debuted with 2AM in 2008, the public met a young man with a delicate voice, expressive eyes, and a heartbreakingly soft demeanor. The group's debut single, This Song, painted them as the sentimental ballad kings of K-pop, a counterbalance to their brother group 2PM, known for muscles and dance-heavy performances. For a while, Jo Kwon played the role perfectly. The mournful ballads, the sorrowful gazes on music shows, the melancholic tone in every line, he embodied the emotional male lead archetype that K-pop loved to romanticize. On screen, he was the face of heartbreak, loneliness, and soft masculinity. But off-screen, a very different Jo Kwon was fighting to break free. In variety shows and behind-the-scenes clips, fans quickly noticed something unusual. Unlike the reserved, almost shy ballad singer persona shown on stage, Jo Kwon was loud, energetic, and flamboyant. He cracked jokes at lightning speed. His laugh could fill an entire studio. He danced with exaggerated comical gestures. Soon, Korean variety shows gave it a name, Kob Jo Kwon, a phrase that roughly translates to over-the-top Jo Kwon. At first, the label seemed playful. Audiences laughed. TV ratings climbed. Producers loved inviting him because he guaranteed viral moments. But underneath the laughter, there was a darker reality. Kwon was towing a dangerous line in South Korean entertainment between being the nation's favorite funny guy and being ridiculed as too much, too feminine, or worse, the unspoken word that no mainstream network dared say out loud: gay. For Jo Kwon, it was a balancing act every single day. On one side, he wanted to be his authentic, high-energy self. On the other, he knew the risks. This was a country where LGBTQ+ representation remained either invisible or framed as comedy relief. Public figures who even hinted at non-heteronormative behavior were often met with scandal, career destruction, or worse, being blacklisted by major networks. But Kwon leaned into the chaos anyway. He wore pink feather bows on late-night shows. He did Beyoncé dance covers in heels during fan meetings. He laughed when the audience laughed, even when the laughter felt like mockery. Because deep down, he knew something important. Every second he spent being visible, even if the world called it acting silly, he was creating space for kids watching at home who felt just as different. There's a scene from 2010 that fans still talk about today. Jo Kwon, dressed in tight gold pants, performing an over-the-top cover of Lady Gaga's Telephone. The performance went viral. International fans loved it. LGBTQ forums across Asia buzzed with excitement. For many queer teens in countries like Korea, Japan, and even conservative parts of Southeast Asia, Jo Kwon wasn't just being funny, he was being brave. And yet, the criticism kept coming. Korean netizens filled online forums with anonymous comments. Why does he act like a woman? Is he even a real man? Disgusting behavior for a national idol. Major brands grew hesitant to sign him for endorsements. Some TV programs asked him to tone it down. Even close colleagues joked publicly about his mannerisms, laughing with him, but also laughing at him. But Jo Kwon stayed true to his energy. Each exaggerated dance move, each loud cackle, each unapologetic appearance in brightly colored stage outfits became small acts of defiance. And this isn't just about entertainment. In a larger context, what Jo Kwon was doing mattered on a societal level. For LGBTQ+ youth across South Korea and Asia, Visibility is often the first step toward survival. In countries where conservative politics, religious pressures, and cultural taboos silence queer voices, having a public figure, even one who never explicitly says "I'm gay," can mean everything. It's hope, it's representation, it's proof that you're not alone. Years later, in interviews, Jo Kwon admitted that the Cab Jo Kwon persona wasn't just a stage character, it was a survival mechanism. A way to stay visible in an industry and society that didn't yet have language or space for who he truly was. Looking back, it's easy to see that these years weren't just about chart-topping ballads or viral TV moments. They were the groundwork, the training ground for something bigger. Jo Kwon was slowly, bravely, and often painfully preparing the world for the day he would finally tell his truth. And for millions of viewers watching him dance, laugh, and shine, whether they realized it or not, that truth was already speaking louder than words. And now, for those who have followed Jo Kwon throughout his variety show days, for those who have laughed and cried with him on screen, there is one question that remains unanswered that no one dares to ask out loud. Will Jo Kwon ever tell the world who he really is? What do you think? Do audiences really love him for who he is, or do they just love the version of him they can laugh at? And more importantly, how long can a person live in a character before the truth demands release? Tell us what you think before we dive deeper into the next chapter of Jo Kwon's journey. By 2012, after years of standing behind the collective identity of 2AM, Jo Kwon was finally ready to step into the spotlight as a solo artist. But true to his nature, he wasn't interested in playing it safe. His debut solo album, I'm the One, was unlike anything the K-pop industry had seen from a male idol before. The title track exploded with energy, a fusion of pop, dance, and bright electronic beats. The lyrics championed individuality and self-love. In the music video, Jo Kwon danced through kaleidoscopic backdrops, dressed in vibrant, gender-fluid outfits that defied K-pop's rigid fashion standards for male performers. But it wasn't just the music that grabbed headlines, it was the visuals. Jo Kwon performed on live broadcasts wearing towering 7-inch Jeffrey Campbell heels. Every step he took was both choreography and protest. For a country where male idols were expected to conform to masculine aesthetics, short haircuts, dark suits, controlled gestures, Jo Kwon's bold styling was a cultural shockwave. Korean media outlets called him provocative. International publications like Billboard and MTV praised him as a groundbreaker. But with the applause came criticism. Online forums erupted with hateful comments. Some TV shows pushed his performances to late-night time slots, worried about impressionable youth. Sponsors withdrew. Certain music programs cut camera angles to avoid full-body shots of him dancing in heels. Despite the pushback, Jo Kwon doubled down. He appeared on variety shows like Radio Star and Immortal Songs, unapologetically discussing his love for unique fashion and performance art. On Yoo Hee-ul's sketchbook, when asked why he risked his career for such unconventional performances, he smiled and said, "This is how I survive. This is how I express myself." In 2013, Jo Kwon began exploring another side of his artistry, musical theater. He landed the lead role in the Korean adaptation of Jesus Christ Superstar, shocking audiences with his emotional range and powerful stage presence. This was followed by another pivotal role in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, where he portrayed Adam's Felicia, a drag queen character full of sass, vulnerability, and fierce confidence. Playing a queer-coded character on a mainstream stage in South Korea wasn't just a career move, it was a statement. Jo Kwon received both standing ovations and fresh waves of criticism. Parents groups filed complaints with theaters. Some media outlets ran headlines questioning whether such performances were appropriate for Korean audiences. But every role became another layer in his evolving identity, not just as a singer, but as an artist unafraid to blur the lines between performance and activism. He didn't stop at musicals. In 2014, Jo Kwon returned to variety TV with renewed energy, appearing as a mentor on K-pop Star and later becoming a fixed panelist on shows like King of Masked Singer and Lipstick Prince. Each appearance allowed him to chip away at rigid ideas of masculinity. One smile, one joke, one honest conversation at a time. In 2016, he returned to music with the single Crosswalk, a ballad that showcased his classic emotional vocals, proving he hadn't abandoned his roots. The song topped various Korean charts, reminding critics that beyond the costumes and controversy, Jokwon was still a powerhouse vocalist. Then came Animal, another single that pushed visual boundaries with heavy makeup and high-fashion editorial styling. Each new release felt like Jokwon was peeling back another layer of public expectation. His versatility became impossible to ignore. On TV, he shifted between hosting roles, guest appearances on Knowing Bros, Happy Together, and We Got Married, where he was famously paired with brown-eyed girls Ga In. The show became one of the highest-rated seasons in its history, introducing him to millions of viewers who fell for his humor and charm. But behind every public appearance, Jokwon continued facing a silent war between maintaining his career and staying true to himself. Even as he smiled for cameras and delivered witty one-liners, the pressure to tone it down never really disappeared. Industry insiders would later reveal that some casting directors thought twice before booking him for family-friendly shows. Fashion stylists argued over how much makeup was too much for a male idol. Some sponsors preferred him only in funny, non-threatening roles, avoiding projects that allowed him to explore serious artistry or themes of gender expression. And beneath the makeup, behind the bright stage lights, a question lingered. Was South Korea, or even the larger Asian entertainment industry, truly ready for an idol who refused to fit into any box? And perhaps an even harder question, could Jokwon keep pushing these boundaries without losing everything he had worked so hard to build? For the LGBTQ+ community across Asia, his struggle symbolized something universal: the price of visibility and the emotional cost of constantly having to prove your worth. So now, looking back at this bold, chaotic, and deeply personal phase in Jokwon's career, what do you think? Was the industry celebrating his bravery, or just tolerating him as entertainment? And more importantly, in your opinion, did these years empower Jokwon to reclaim his identity, or did they force him into yet another performance, this time for survival? If this part of Jokwon's story inspired you, or made you rethink how we treat gender and identity in entertainment, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to Rainbow Vibes for more stories that matter. Your support helps us bring LGBTQ+ voices to the forefront, one story at a time. Between 2012 and 2018, Jokwon's career shifted in ways few could have predicted. After years of standing behind the collective identity of 2AM, and after making waves with his bold solo debut I'm the One, he began stepping into spaces that felt less commercial, but more personal. The transition from a K-pop idol to a musical theater actor wasn't a marketing strategy. It was survival. For Jokwon, music had always been about expression, but theater became a form of emotional release he hadn't realized he needed. His journey started with solo music. After I'm the One, Jokwon didn't just stick to feel-good pop. He experimented with moodier sounds, releasing singles like Crosswalk in 2016, a ballad that showcased not just vocal range but emotional maturity. The song topped digital charts, reminding everyone that beyond the costumes and headlines, Jokwon could still deliver pure, raw music. But the stage kept calling. In 2013, he took on his first major musical theater role in the Korean adaptation of Jesus Christ Superstar, portraying King Herod. It was sarcastic, flamboyant, and full of attitude, perfectly suited for someone like Jokwon, who had spent years navigating between entertainment and personal truth. Then came Priscilla, Queen of the Desert in 2014. Jokwon stepped into the role of Adam Felicia, a drag queen character full of sass and vulnerability. The risk was huge. No other mainstream male K-pop idol had dared take on a drag role on a public stage before. The costume, the makeup, the storytelling, all of it placed him directly in the middle of Korea's ongoing, uncomfortable conversation about gender and identity in entertainment. Some fans were thrilled to see him break boundaries. Others weren't. Online forums lit up with debates. Variety shows avoided mentioning the production during his guest appearances. Brand deals dried up. But Jo Kwon stood firm. In interviews, when asked why he chose such controversial roles, he often answered with calm, simple honesty. This is part of me. This is my art. And then, in 2018, came the turning point. Jo Kwon was cast as Jamie in the Korean production of Everybody's Talking About Jamie. A queer teenager, a drag queen, a boy fighting for the right to be seen, to be celebrated, to be loved for exactly who he is. This wasn't just acting. This was autobiography, staged and lit for hundreds to watch every night. Performing as Jamie meant wearing dresses and towering heels for 2 straight hours. It meant standing in front of strangers, singing about isolation, fear, and eventually, self-acceptance. It meant staring down the audience, daring them to look away. Not everyone stayed in their seats. Some viewers left during intermission. Others flooded online spaces with criticism, labeling Jo Kwon attention-seeking, embarrassing, or worse. But something had shifted. Jo Kwon wasn't performing for applause anymore. He was performing for visibility, for truth, and for the LGBTQ+ community, both in South Korea and across Asia. This mattered. Social media filled with messages from fans thanking him for giving them hope. From closeted students in Korea, from LGBTQ+ youth in Thailand, Taiwan, and Japan. For many, seeing Jo Kwon up there, in makeup, heels, and full vulnerability, felt like seeing themselves for the first time. In interviews with international media, Jo Kwon started speaking more openly, not about his own identity just yet, but about the challenges queer artists face in Korea. About the mental toll of constant criticism, about the loneliness of being the only one pushing certain conversations forward. And for many fans, watching him take these risks raised a simple but powerful question. Was Jo Kwon finally preparing to tell the world his full truth? Jo Kwon never gave a direct answer, not yet, but the signs were there. He thanked his fans for staying with him through every stage, whether it was ballads, dance pop, variety shows, or musicals. He openly expressed gratitude toward LGBTQ+ audiences who found strength in his performances. He even spoke directly to young viewers. If watching me gives you hope, that means I'm doing something right. The journey from K-pop singer to musical theater performer wasn't easy, but with each show, each curtain call, each bold costume change, Jo Kwon was pushing one step closer to something he'd been avoiding for years, saying out loud who he really was. And as the spotlight faded at the end of every Jamie performance, both Jo Kwon and his fans were left with the same lingering thought. If he's this brave on stage, how brave will he be when the next curtain rises? For years, fans had waited. Every performance, every interview, every Instagram post felt like another puzzle piece. The bright heels, the makeup, the unapologetic attitude, Jo Kwon had been dropping hints for most of his career. But there was always one thing missing: the words. Then, in early 2020, everything changed. During an interview with News One Korea, Jo Kwon finally spoke the truth he had been carrying for so long. When asked about how he identified, he didn't hesitate. "I don't identify strictly as male or female. I consider myself genderless." It wasn't a dramatic announcement. There was no glossy magazine cover or viral YouTube confession. It was just a simple statement. But in the context of South Korea, where LGBTQ+ identities are still treated like taboos, that single sentence hit like an earthquake. For the first time in mainstream K-pop history, a male idol had publicly declared a non-binary identity. Jo Kwon wasn't using metaphors anymore. He wasn't hiding behind costumes or performance personas. This time, it was real. The LGBTQ+ community across South Korea and Asia reacted instantly. Social media filled with messages of support. Activists called it a breakthrough. Queer teens reposted his quote with pride. For them, it wasn't just Jo Kwon coming out. It was validation. It was a reminder that even in a country where LGBTQ+ visibility often feels invisible, someone like him could exist, survive, and speak up. But not everyone was celebrating. Online forums turned toxic overnight. Some netizens accused him of chasing attention. Others argued he was setting a bad example for Korean youth. TV panels debated whether K-pop had gone too far. Brands hesitated to renew endorsement deals. Even some longtime fans felt uncomfortable, unsure how to reconcile their image of Jo Kwon with this new, unfiltered version. Jo Kwon read the headlines, he saw the comments, and he answered them the only way he knew how, by showing up as himself. He started posting photos in traditionally feminine clothing without explanation. No captions, no context, just Jo Kwon existing. In lace dresses, in bold eyeliner, in poses that defied every gender expectation the Korean entertainment industry had tried to place on him for 2 decades. In one particularly striking post, he stood in front of a full-length mirror wearing a flowing skirt and combat boots. The caption? Just 3 words, "This is me." For LGBTQ+ youth, especially non-binary and genderqueer individuals across Asia, that post became a symbol. A digital flag planted firmly in the middle of an industry still reluctant to embrace gender diversity. Organizations like Korean Queer Culture Festival and LGBTQ+ student groups at major universities publicly praised Jo Kwon's bravery. International LGBTQ+ media outlets covered the story, calling it a rare and critical moment for representation in K-pop. And yet, behind the celebration, there was reality. Korea still had no anti-discrimination laws protecting LGBTQ+ individuals. Same-sex marriage remained illegal. LGBTQ+ characters on TV were still often reduced to comic relief or tragic side stories. For Jo Kwon, coming out as genderless wasn't just a personal milestone. It was a political act, a risk that could cost him roles, endorsements, and opportunities for years to come. In later interviews, when asked if he feared losing fans or career momentum, his answer was honest and quietly powerful. "If being myself costs me everything, then at least I know I was honest." That kind of clarity, that refusal to shrink, didn't just inspire fans, it shook the industry. For the first time, other Korean celebrities, actors, influencers, even fellow singers, began to mention gender identity in interviews. Some cautiously, others still coded. But the conversation had started, and Jo Kwon had opened the door. In LGBTQ+ circles across Seoul, cafes and community centers buzzed with hope. Posters of Jo Kwon from his Jamie days were pinned next to pride flags. Young fans quoted him during open mic nights. His Instagram became a safe space for queer followers. And in the middle of it all, Jo Kwon stayed steady. He never claimed to speak for everyone. He never called himself an activist. But through every action, every post, every performance, he was making space for those who didn't have a microphone. For a generation of LGBTQ youth growing up in South Korea, struggling with identity, loneliness, and silence, Jo Kwon's words felt like permission. Permission to feel, permission to exist, permission to speak. And as his story spread beyond Korea, reaching LGBTQ+ audiences in Thailand, Taiwan, Japan, and beyond, a quiet question began to echo among fans worldwide. If Jo Kwon could stand up in front of an entire nation and say, "This is me," what's stopping the rest of us? By 2024, Jo Kwon entered a phase few K-pop idols ever reach, not just in career longevity, but in personal truth. After nearly 2 decades of navigating a world obsessed with image control, Jo Kwon stopped surviving and started living with intention. His music shifted toward emotional honesty. Songs like Confession of a Friend didn't dominate the charts, but they left an impact. Fans listened, not just for melody, but for the raw emotions embedded in every lyric. Jo Kwon wasn't chasing radio hits, he was telling stories. Returning to theater, he embraced roles that let him explore themes of gender and identity that K-pop never allowed. Productions like Jamie and Everybody's Talking About Jamie became more than performances. They became personal statements about acceptance and freedom. In interviews, Jo Kwon spoke openly about being queer-coded and gender non-conforming in South Korea. He didn't mask the truth. He talked about depression, isolation, and the pressure of living under a constant spotlight. But hope was always at the center of his words. On social media, he posted images of himself in suits, dresses, combat boots, and heels, sometimes with makeup, sometimes without. When asked if it was a statement, his reply was simple: "This isn't about making statements anymore. This is just me." For younger idols navigating queer aesthetics, Jo Kwon became a mentor. Through quiet advice, late-night calls, and private encouragement, he helped others find strength in their difference. He showed them that survival was possible and authenticity was worth the risk. Jo Kwon's impact moved beyond music and theater. He became a visible figure in LGBTQ+ activism, participating in pride-themed fashion shoots, LGBTQ+ charity events, and collaborating with queer designers. Korean magazines that once avoided LGBTQ+ topics now featured him, especially during Pride Month. A photo shoot where he wore a flowing white dress with combat boots and a clean-shaven face went viral. The headline read, "Beyond labels, Jo Kwon in his own words." Fans across Asia shared the image, calling it a symbol of courage. But with visibility came backlash. Conservative commentators accused him of pushing an agenda. Hate flooded his social media whenever he appeared in gender-fluid styling. Still, Jo Kwon kept showing up. At a university speech focused on LGBTQ+ youth mental health, Jo Kwon delivered a line that became iconic. "As long as there's one person like me, there will always be hope for LGBTQ+ youth in Korea." That sentence turned into hashtags, t-shirt prints, and late-night social media affirmations. Amid these public milestones, Jo Kwon let fans glimpse his private heart. In one rare interview, he spoke quietly but firmly about love. "I've loved this person for a long time. I really believe I love them. I feel like there's a strong connection between us. If they asked me to live a normal life, to step away from the stage, I think I would." For someone who spent years fighting for visibility, that confession revealed a softer, deeply human side of him. It was a reminder that queer love deserves the same respect, the same sacrifices, and the same place in public conversation as any other kind of love. LGBTQ+ student groups at major Korean universities started citing him as a point of reference in discussions on representation. Queer fans from Thailand, Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines created fan forums dedicated to both his music and his journey as a queer role model in Asian pop culture. Fashion circles credited him with redefining gender expression in Korean media. When asked in 2024 if he regretted being so open, Jo Kwon's answer was clear. "If I had stayed silent, I wouldn't have been able to live with myself." Today, Jo Kwon still performs, still shares lighthearted social moments, and still stands for something bigger than himself. Each song, each interview, each photo now reflects a lifetime of fighting for authenticity. As South Korea continues to debate LGBTQ+ visibility, Jo Kwon remains at the center, not shouting, not demanding, but existing fully and visibly. In a society where simply existing as your true self remains an act of rebellion, Jo Kwon's legacy speaks louder than any speech. For every young queer person wondering if their story is worth telling, Jo Kwon's life offers an answer. You don't have to change who you are to deserve love. You don't have to apologize to deserve space. And most importantly, you're not alone. Jo Kwon's story isn't just about music or fame or breaking industry rules. It's about finding the courage to live honestly in a world that doesn't always make that easy. For every smile he's shown, for every risk he's taken, he's given hope to countless LGBTQ+ youth across Korea and beyond. Thank you for watching and supporting voices like his. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Which part of Jo Kwon's journey moved you most? And what does his story mean to you? If you want to hear the next chapter or learn about other LGBTQ+ pioneers in K-pop, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Rainbow Vibes for more untold stories that matter. What happens when the first openly gay K-pop artist refuses to play by anyone's rules? This is the story of MRSHLL Bang, also known as MRSHLL, a Korean-American singer who didn't just come out, he came through. In a world that tried to silence him, he built his own stage, his own sound, and his own legacy. From church choirs to queer anthems, from rejection to revolution, his journey is not just about music, it's about courage, love, and changing K-pop forever. MRSHLL Bang was born in the sun-soaked suburbs of Orange County, California, a place filled with cul-de-sacs, green lawns, and Sunday services. He was the youngest son in a Korean-American household where faith wasn't just a belief, it was a foundation. His parents, devout Christians, didn't just go to church, they were the church. Elders, leaders, choir directors. God was in every meal prayer, every family outing, every conversation. And Marshall, obedient and bright-eyed, followed suit. He wore bow ties on Sundays, clapped along to gospel hymns, and sang in the choir with a voice that made people turn around in awe. It was in that very church, under stained glass windows and whispers of heaven, that Marshall first discovered his gift for music. At age 7, he learned to play the organ, fingers too small to reach full chords but eager to press any key that made beauty. His voice, clear, controlled, and soaked in soul, felt like a miracle even to adults. The congregation adored him. People would nudge each other and say, "That boy is going to serve the Lord with that voice." They said it with joy. Marshall nodded with a smile. But inside, a different story had begun to unfold. By the time he reached middle school, Marshall felt different. Not in the obvious ways. He wasn't rebellious, didn't slack off, didn't talk back. But when the boys around him started noticing girls, Marshall noticed them. Their energy, their laughter, the way their hair curled at the nape of their necks. And with every flutter in his chest came a crushing wave of fear. Because in his world, in this church, in his family, that kind of feeling wasn't just wrong. It was damnable. So he hid it. He buried it deep under rehearsals, schoolwork, church activities, and polite smiles. He prayed every night, not the kind of soft, meditative prayers people think of when they hear the word. These were desperate, tear-stained, bargaining prayers. "Please, God," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Please take this away. I want to be good. I want to be normal. I want to make you proud." There were nights he cried so hard he had to muffle himself with a pillow so no one would hear. He read every Bible verse he could find that mentioned purity and sin, trying to decode his place in the world. He fasted. He confessed, to himself, to God, never to others. Because even in the house of worship that had raised him, he knew the truth. Love was conditional. On Sundays, he'd stand in front of the congregation, harmonizing with the choir, pretending to belong. But behind the robe and that angelic voice was a boy crumbling under the weight of self-hatred. He became a master of pretending to be joyful, pretending to be grateful, pretending that nothing inside him was breaking. It was a lonely performance, and no standing ovation could ever quiet the silence in his soul. He'd heard the whispers at church about that one boy who'd been caught with another, about how his parents moved away in shame, about how we pray for his soul. Marshall learned early on that being different wasn't just a secret. It was a threat, a ticking bomb that could blow up everything: his family's reputation, his standing in the community, his dreams of becoming a gospel singer. And so music became both sanctuary and cell. He lost himself in harmonies, in four-part choral arrangements, in the hum of organ pedals beneath his feet. He could disappear in music, let it drown out the noise in his mind. But even music couldn't silence the growing ache of truth inside him. He wanted to be free. He wanted to sing not just about love, but from love. The kind of love that lived in the shadows of his chest, unspoken and unloved. When the sanctuary emptied after service, he would sit at the edge of the piano bench, alone, fingers trembling over the keys. He'd play melodies he didn't dare share, soft, aching tunes that carried all the questions he wasn't allowed to ask. Why me? Why now? Why this heart? But the silence always answered back, because this is who you are. He didn't yet know the word gay, but he knew enough to know it was dangerous. He didn't yet know that someday he'd sing songs that would echo around the world, not from shame, but from pride. For now, Marshall Bang was just a boy with a secret, a boy raised by God and shackled by shame. But even in that quiet agony, something inside him refused to die. A seed of self-worth, a flicker of future light, and one day that flicker would become a fire. By the time Marshall turned 20, the weight of silence had grown unbearable. He had spent most of his teenage years split in two, half of him worshiping with open arms, the other half folded in fear. The church had taught him how to sing, how to serve, how to pray, but it had also taught him how to hide, how to pretend, how to disappear. And one day, without warning or drama, he simply couldn't do it anymore. He stepped away, not with a slammed door, not with a grand speech, but with a quiet absence that spoke louder than any sermon. Leaving the church didn't mean leaving God, not yet. He still prayed, still asked questions into the night, but what changed was this: he no longer expected an answer. The silence no longer felt sacred, it felt like exile. And in that silence, one thing remained steady: music. Music, unlike people, never judged. It didn't ask who he loved, or why he didn't say it out loud. Music just listened. It held him. With no clear plan, but a desperate hope, MRSHLL packed 2 suitcases and a heart full of contradictions and flew to South Korea. It was part dream, part escape. He had read about K-pop, heard the smooth harmonies, the polished image. He thought maybe, just maybe, there would be space for him somewhere in the machine. Not as himself, perhaps, but as a voice. He didn't have connections. He didn't speak Korean fluently, but he had skill. And more than that, he had hunger to survive. He picked up gigs as a hairstylist for idol trainees. He spent hours curling bangs, trimming sideburns, blending colors for perfectly sculpted photo shoots. He smiled, nodded, played the part. At night, he recorded demo vocals for producers who never asked about the singer behind the mic. His voice drifted through practice rooms, rehearsal tracks, and sometimes even made its way onto albums without his name. He became a ghost in the very world he once dreamed of entering. Not because he wasn't talented, but because he wasn't marketable. Behind closed doors, managers complimented his voice, but asked if he could tone down the way he walked, the way he spoke. "You're too soft," one of them said. "People will assume." Assume what? That he loved differently? That he felt deeply? That he was in fact real? MRSHLL shrank. He nodded. He adjusted. He wore the mask they offered him and thanked them for the privilege. And every day, he told himself, just a little longer, just until you've made it. Then you can be honest. But that then never came. He watched others rise, boys with confident jaws and practiced winks, while he remained in the background, invisible. Loneliness settled into his chest like dust. Quiet, constant, impossible to shake. He missed home, but not the version of home where he'd felt unsafe. He missed church, but not the church that made him feel unworthy. He missed himself, the version he'd only ever imagined in secret. The one who sang with his whole heart, not half of it buried in shame. There were nights in Seoul when he'd sit in a tiny studio, the only light coming from the recording booth, and just sing. Not for money, not for credits, just for air. Just to remember what his voice sounded like when it wasn't trying to please anyone. Sometimes, he'd leave the studio and walk for hours through the neon-lit back streets of Hongdae. Headphones in, lost in demos that would never be released. He'd watch couples laugh over street food, friends sing in smoky karaoke rooms, strangers rush toward subways under flickering lights, and he'd wonder what it felt like to be seen. Truly seen. Not as someone useful, not as someone safe, but as someone real, someone worthy of taking up space. He began journaling again, scribbling lyrics in the margins of notebooks, writing melodies on napkins in cafes. Some songs were sad, some defiant, some quietly hopeful. They weren't written for fame or approval or even performance. They were lifelines. They were tiny acts of rebellion, proof that he still had something to say, even if no one was listening yet. He wondered, often, if he would live his whole life like this, in between, not quite visible, not quite erased, not hated, but never celebrated. He feared he'd die with stories unsung, love unspoken, truth unexplored. But even in that fear, there was a flicker, a pull, a whisper in the music that said, "Don't give up, you're not alone." And so he didn't. He stayed, he sang, he waited. The world didn't open its arms, but somewhere deep inside, MRSHLL began opening his own. And in that quiet beginning, something started to grow, a question louder than shame. What if the truth was the only song left worth singing? He still had no stage, no label, no clear path. But for the first time, he had the faint outline of something more important. The sound of his own voice, unfiltered and unafraid, echoing back to him in the dark. By 2015, Marshall knew he couldn't live in hiding forever. Years of floating in the background, ghostwriting, demo singing, styling idols had taught him one brutal truth. No one was going to hand him a spotlight. If he wanted to be seen, he'd have to claim that space himself. And to do that, he needed more than a voice. He needed a name that wasn't tied to shame or fear or silence. He needed to become someone who could carry the truth out loud. That's when MRSHLL was born, stripped of vowels, stripped of pretense. It wasn't just a stage name, it was a declaration. MRSHLL was everything Marshall had never been allowed to be. Bold, unapologetic, visible. This new identity wasn't just about creating music. It was about creating himself. A version that didn't edit pronouns or dodge questions. A version that didn't ask permission to exist. The name came to him late one night while looping a beat in his tiny Seoul apartment, headphones wrapped around his neck, heart racing. He scribbled the letters onto a napkin from a coffee shop where he'd written lyrics for weeks. It started as an idea, almost a dare. Drop the vowels, leave the weight behind, and suddenly it clicked. Marshall wasn't just who he was, it was who he had survived to become. His sound followed suit, lush, smooth, and emotionally raw, R&B at its core, but with a K-pop polish that mirrored the world he had grown up orbiting. His debut EP wasn't engineered for radio play or chart domination. It was crafted for anyone who had ever felt like too much or not enough. It was for the queer kid in the back of the church pew, the dreamer in a tiny Seoul apartment, the boy who once prayed his voice would save him, now using it to save someone else. He poured his truth into every lyric, every chord, every layered harmony. Songs like Circle, Pose, and Mirage didn't just suggest queerness, they embraced it. No metaphors, no coded lines, just vulnerability laid bare. This is me, the music seemed to say. And if you feel this too, you're not alone. Then came the interviews. International press, fascinated by his bravery, dubbed him the first openly gay K-pop artist. It was a headline that Marshall never asked for, but one he knew was bigger than him. In Western media, he spoke clearly, without shame. Yes, I'm gay, he told Billboard in 2017. And yes, I'm doing K-pop. That sentence, just 12 words, sparked conversations he never imagined. LGBTQ+ fans across Asia messaged him, thanking him for being their voice. His DMs filled with stories of closeted teens, tearful gratitude, and aching hope. But in Korea, silence. No major label extended a contract. No variety shows came calling. Radio stations rarely played his music. The industry that once praised his vocals now pretended he didn't exist. Behind closed doors, executives whispered that his image was too risky, that Korea wasn't ready. One company even suggested he change his lyrics to make them more neutral. He refused. If he was going to risk everything, he wasn't going to dilute the truth. "I didn't come this far to go halfway," he said in an interview. What stung most wasn't the rejection, it was the erasure. Marshall had expected backlash. He was ready for criticism. But the cold shoulder, the polite ignoring, that was harder to bear. It told him that his identity wasn't offensive, it was inconvenient. But Marshall didn't back down. He kept writing, kept performing, kept creating. He collaborated with underground producers, queer artists, and indie filmmakers. His live sets became safe havens, spaces filled with joy, with sweat, with freedom. In those rooms, he wasn't a headline or a risk. He was real, and more importantly, he was enough. Sometimes the crowds were small, 50 people, maybe less. But when they sang his lyrics back to him, it felt like redemption. It reminded him why he started this in the first place. Not to be famous, but to be heard. To create a space he had never been offered as a kid. One where no one asked him to shrink. One where his softness wasn't a liability, it was his power. Becoming Marshall wasn't a marketing strategy. It was survival. It was the moment a boy raised on shame turned his truth into art. He didn't need the whole world to applaud. Just one listener who heard their story in his. And every time he stepped on stage as Marshall, he wasn't just performing. He was proving quietly, powerfully, that he didn't have to choose between music and truth. He could be both. He already was. And maybe that's what courage really is. Not being loud, but being real. Have you ever had to hide a part of yourself just to survive? And what would it mean to finally stop hiding? In 2017, Western media handed MRSHLL a crown laced with thorns, the first openly gay K-pop star. It was meant as praise, and it certainly sounded revolutionary. Billboard printed it. Out magazine followed. Soon, headlines from New York to Berlin turned his name into a symbol, a movement, a moment for the global LGBTQ+ community. Especially for queer Asians, it felt like a flag finally being raised in a space that had always seemed off-limits. But back in Seoul, the reception was ice cold. While the West clapped, Korea turned away. There was no official ban, no public scandal, just silence. Deafening, calculated silence. It was the kind that didn't scream no, but whispered, not you. MRSHLL had imagined that honesty would at least earn him respect. Instead, it earned him absence. No music shows, no radio interviews, no features on trendy playlists. The very system he had grown up admiring had quietly shut the gates the moment he stepped through them as himself. Industry insiders tried to be polite. One label rep said, "We love your sound, but the market isn't there yet." Another asked if he could tone it down, use they instead of he in his lyrics. One even offered to fund his EP, but only if he erased any queer subtext. Just focus on the music, they said, as if his identity was a distraction, not the very soul of his songs. He refused, not angrily, not loudly, just firmly. He'd already lived a decade hiding his truth. He wasn't going to sing in code now. And that quiet defiance cost him more than anyone realized. Online, the knives came out fast. Trolls said he was corrupting Korean values. Others mocked his stage name, his fashion, his voice, his face. They said he was too soft, too loud, too foreign. One comment read, "We don't need your kind in our K-pop." And perhaps what cut deepest, some international fans, even queer ones, turned on him too. They wanted queer representation, sure, but only if it was wrapped in fantasy, not reality. They weren't ready for someone who didn't just play a role, but lived the life. Yet somewhere in the margins, hope was blooming. Not in packed stadiums or viral dance challenges, but in smaller places, realer places. A student in Manila messaged him, "Your songs helped me come out to my mom." A gay bar owner in Tokyo played his entire album during Pride Week. A trans teen in Seoul wrote, "You make me feel like I belong here." Thousands of messages like that. Not millions, but enough to make the pain worth it. His gigs were small, sometimes just 30 people in a basement bar. But those 30 sang every word like it was gospel. They cried, they screamed, they held up their phones and filmed like they were documenting history, because to them, they were. MRSHLL wasn't selling out arenas, he was selling honesty. In a culture still afraid of what's different, that was a revolutionary act. When he sang about love, he used he/him pronouns without apology. When he wore eyeliner or crop tops, he didn't ask for permission. His art wasn't just queer-coded, it was queer-declared. Bold, tender, defiant. And that made him dangerous in the eyes of an industry addicted to control. The real cost of being first wasn't in missed opportunities, it was in loneliness. In knowing he had kicked a door open but might never walk through it himself. That maybe, just maybe, the ones who followed would benefit more than he ever could. But he did it anyway. Not for clout, not for trend, for truth. To many, MRSHLL became a lifeline, a lighthouse. He wasn't a glossy idol, pretending to love the girl in the MV. He was the man who dared to sing the line, "He kissed me and I came alive," and mean every syllable. His music wasn't background noise, it was background survival. For anyone who'd ever felt too much or not enough, he became the soundtrack of resistance. Even now, mainstream Korea hasn't fully embraced him. Award shows overlook him. Networks still hesitate. But his legacy isn't measured in trophies. It's written in hearts that finally beat a little freer. And slowly, the culture is shifting. A little more open, a little less scared. And that shift began with someone who chose to be first, knowing it might also mean being alone. MRSHLL once said, "I didn't come out for headlines, I came out for healing." And maybe in the end, that's what he gave us. Not just songs, but space. Space to exist, space to feel, space to hope. So here's what we ask you now. Would you still be brave if it meant losing everything, just to help someone else feel seen? If MRSHLL's story moved you, if his voice helped you feel less alone, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. Because in a world still learning how to love fully, voices like his need all of us to echo back. We see you, we hear you, and we won't look away. After it all, the silence in Korea, the online attacks, the labels that ignored him, MRSHLL had quietly come to believe that maybe love wasn't meant for him. Not real love, not the kind of love that makes you sigh. He sang about it, wrote about it, fantasized about it, but it always felt distant, like a beautiful house he could never enter. His first relationships were proof of that. Fleeting, coded, filled with dread, late-night texts that disappeared with the rising sun, stolen kisses in parked cars, no hands held in public, just shadows and whispers. Being gay in the K-pop space was isolating, but being gay and yearning for connection, it was a different kind of pain. A pain that lay deep in the chest and didn't go away when the music stopped. MRSHLL tried to protect himself. He focused on his art, on his fans, on the fight. But inside, the hunger for true, uncompromising love never really went away. Then 2021 came. He met someone, unexpectedly, naturally, a quiet man with kind eyes and a smile that never wavered when MRSHLL talked about his past. He was Latinx, living in Los Angeles, also working in a creative field, but not famous, not chasing the spotlight. And that was the magic. To him, MRSHLL didn't have to be MRSHLL, he could just be MRSHLL. Awkward, soft, real. For the first time, there was no hiding. They walked through Koreatown, holding hands like teenagers, cooked dinner, argued about their favorite R&B albums, sang "I love you" without checking to see if anyone is listening. MRSHLL shares glimpses of the relationship online, not to confirm, but to let people know. Because he knows somewhere, a weird Korean teenager is watching, and wondering if this love is possible. Maybe. That year he released Pose, a smooth, confident track filled with longing and joy. Then came Mirage, a more vulnerable confession about how fragile love feels when you've never been in public before. Circle completes the emotional trifecta, a song about coming back to someone over and over again because your soul still misses you, even when the world has forgotten. These aren't just love songs. They're roadmaps for queer Asians, for immigrant kids torn between tradition and identity, for anyone who has ever been told that their love doesn't belong in the day. Through his music, MRSHLL has provided a gentle place to land, a reminder that queer love isn't rebellion, it's a right. What makes this relationship different isn't that it's perfect. It's not perfect. There are cultural differences, language barriers, insecurities, but there's honesty, there's healing, there's laughter over breakfast and silent prayers before bed. For MRSHLL, it's not just love, it's safety in love. And that safety has done what no audience could. It's rewritten his story. He's no longer singing to survive. He's singing to celebrate. And the world began to change, little by little, with him. Not all at once, not with fireworks, but in small, important ways. The Korean media began whispering his name again. This time unabashedly. Independent festivals invited him. Young artists began citing him as an influence. A student in Busan used one of his lyrics. The tide didn't turn, but it did. Love did. Not just romantic love, but self-love, community love. The kind of love that said, you belong here, you're worthy, you're not alone. Looking back now, MRSHLL doesn't call this period of his life a happy ending. He calls it a new beginning. One builds not on fear, but on faith, in oneself, in one's art, and in the truth that love, when fully embraced, doesn't just heal, it transforms. And to all those out there who are still wondering whether they deserve it, MRSHLL's story answers softly but clearly, you do. In a world where love is often painted in a single color, MRSHLL dared to add new shades. His story isn't just about falling in love, it's about reclaiming love. And in doing so, he gave us a new kind of anthem. A song about two men holding hands on a sidewalk in broad daylight that becomes a symbol of survival, of courage, of quiet triumph. Perhaps it's gay love at its best, without the fuss or drama. So now we turn to you. What does love look like in your world? Who are the people that remind you you're enough? And if MRSHLL's journey helped you believe, even for a second, that you deserve to be seen and cherished, hold on to that. Because your story matters too. Queer love isn't a trend, it's truth wrapped in courage. There was a time when Marshall Bang still believed he needed the approval of others to be heard. The green light of a record label, the approval of a producer, a stage big enough to matter. But after years of writing coded lyrics, silent rooms, and a love story he once thought impossible, he no longer wanted a seat at the table. He built his own, and then he lit it with a fire no industry could ignore. He didn't break into K-pop. He redefined what K-pop could be. No more auditions, no more gatekeepers. MRSHLL became independent, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. The system didn't want someone like him, so he created a system that did. From writing to recording to releasing, every beat came from the community. Every lyric is a collaboration with other queer creators, and it shows. His 2022 album, Alien, is more than a musical project. It's a manifesto, a declaration that being other is not a weakness, it's a gift. The album cover isn't a manufactured idol. It's a gay man with chrome-painted skin, facing the camera raw. No filters, no fantasy, just truth. XYZ, his next EP, goes much further. It's more than a collection of tracks. It's a celebration of queerness in motion. Gender fluidity, families of choice, liberation through dance and voice. He's not chasing radio hits. He's creating soundtracks for the lives of those living on the margins. And then, the world took notice. At World Pride, Miss Michelle stood beneath a sea of rainbow flags, singing not for fame, but for survival, for unity. Clad in silk, unashamedly made up, he performed in both English and Korean to a crowd that saw him in his entirety. He wasn't the gay K-pop singer. He was the voice that made queerness in K-pop visible, audible, and unforgettable. That same year, he stepped up to the red dot of TEDx. But this time, he didn't sing. He spoke. In a tailored suit and with a trembling voice, he told the story of growing up queer, Asian, invisible. It wasn't just a speech, it was a reckoning. He named what others were still too afraid to whisper. And in doing so, he gave thousands of people permission to speak, to breathe, to exist. His impact didn't come from chart numbers. It came from the way his presence shattered the ceiling. Magazine covers once reserved for fake smiles now featured him. Bold lips, painted nails, velvet dresses. The headlines read, "This is what freedom looks like." He didn't follow trends, he created them. And others followed suit. Holland, who was once uncertain about living authentically, credits MRSHLL with giving him courage. Bain, who yearned to live without shame, spoke openly about how MRSHLL's music helped him choose truth. What MRSHLL did wasn't just personal, it was generational. A blueprint for how to be gay, Korean, and proud, all at once. The journey, however, has not been without pain. He has not always been celebrated. He has often been questioned, dismissed, written off. But he has kept going, because silence is no longer an option. He has turned every closed door into a song, every no into a performance, every wound into a window. One night in Seoul, he performed on a rooftop, barefoot in the rain. The crowd, small but vibrant, sang with him through thunder and tears. Strangers held hands, some cried, others just stood there, finally feeling seen. It was not a concert, It was church. MRSHLL didn't just challenge the rules of K-pop. He rewrote them with sparkle, sweat, and grace. And when he walks into a room now, there's no mistaking the power he carries. It's not in his clothes or his voice. It's in who he is. Knowing that he's no longer the exception. He's an example. That's what queer K-pop really means. Not in changing the style. It's in changing who gets the mic and the stories they're allowed to sing. The truth is, MRSHLL didn't just walk through the door. He left the door open. For Holland, for Bane, for every queer teen writing lyrics in secret, for a world still learning that queer voices don't need translation. They just need space. K-pop will never be the same. And that's always been the goal. Because what MRSHLL built wasn't just a career. It was a sanctuary. A space where Korean queers. As I watched his story, I couldn't help but feel both heartbroken and hopeful. The pain he endured, the silence, the rejection, the isolation, reflected what so many gay people still face around the world. But MRSHLL created something bigger than music from that pain. He turned his life into a beacon. To me, his journey is a reminder that visibility isn't about ego. It's about survival, about letting others know they're not alone. It's about the quiet courage to keep singing even when the world isn't listening. And that courage? It's contagious. To every queer person in Korea still living in the shadows, to every artist afraid to live in color, MRSHLL's legacy whispers, "You are not the problem. You are a possibility." And to LGBTQ+ people everywhere, his message is clear. Keep creating, keep dreaming, keep speaking out. The world needs your voice, now more than ever. When a voice dares to be honest, it can resonate across generations. Thank you for joining us in witnessing Marshall Bang's courageous journey. He not only makes music, he opens doors for people who were once afraid to speak. If his story touches you, please share your thoughts below. We truly appreciate your voice. And for those ready to discover more extraordinary journeys like his, stay tuned and subscribe. The next chapter is coming soon. He didn't wait for permission. He stepped into the light, brave, radiant, and unafraid to be himself. In a country where silence is often safer, Katsumonot Namorote chose truth and changed everything. His coming out was more than just a personal act. It was a cultural moment, a beacon for thousands who have waited to see someone like themselves, living freely, unashamedly. Now, we ask you, what does Katsumonot Namorote's fearless honesty stir in you? Tell us your thoughts, your hopes, and what this moment means for the future we're building together. In a world where silence often means safety, Katsumonot Namorote chose something far more dangerous. He chose to be loud. Not loud in volume, but loud in authenticity. Loud in color. Loud in love. And perhaps most radical of all, he chose to be true to himself. Born on November 1st, 1996, in Chiang Mai, Thailand, Earth was born into a society where politeness was valued, conformity was rewarded, and differences were often hidden. But from an early age, Earth broke every unwritten rule. While most children were learning to fit in, he was learning to stand out. He wasn't just expressive, he was radiant. Whether it was his smile, his spontaneous dance moves, or the way he laughed heartily when something amused him, Earth had an electric energy. He wasn't looking for permission to exist, he already was. Chiang Mai, with its serene temples and conservative traditions, may not be the place where a gay icon was born, but Earth was never one to wait in the right place. He created space where there was no space, and he did it first in the most private of places, his home. Like so many LGBTQ+ teens around the world, Earth dealt with the quiet tension that comes with simply being different under his own roof. His family wasn't cruel, but they were cautious. His feminine gestures, his love of bright clothes, and his refusal to act like a boy weren't overlooked. There were glances, worried whispers, family gatherings where the room froze when he walked in. At first it was heartbreaking, but Earth never gave them the performance they wanted, only the truth of who he was. And over time, something beautiful began to unfold. Acceptance that wasn't loud or abrupt, but steady. His mother, in particular, became a quiet supporter. Her support didn't come in the form of dramatic speeches, but in the form of presence. When Earth cried, she sat by his side. When he succeeded, she clapped the loudest. Sometimes love doesn't need to be spoken loudly to be heard deeply. At school, Earth's flashiness was both his shield and his target. Bullies didn't know what to do with him, teachers were reluctant to intervene, and yet, he thrived. Because even in his pain, he was creative. He started making videos in high school, first for fun, then to lift his spirits. At first, they were silly, exaggerated sketches, but they quickly became so much more. Through the lens of the camera, Earth began to build a world that saw him not as too much, but as just right. YouTube wasn't just a platform, it became his refuge. He posted his first videos without any expectations, just hoping that maybe someone, somewhere would understand, and they did. Thousands of people saw him, not as a joke, but as a pioneer. They watched him not just for laughs, but for the truth. Because when Earth put on makeup, he wasn't pretending to be someone else. He was finally letting the world see who he really was. And who he wasn't afraid. Earth never appeared in a viral announcement or wrote a long letter explaining his identity. He didn't need to. His entire life was a living manifesto. Every hand gesture, every outfit, every video. He lived his truth not in statements, but in moments. And for queer teens across Thailand, many of whom had never seen someone so boldly expressed, Earth was more than just a content creator. He was proof that joy was possible. That femininity didn't mean weakness, that you could be vulnerable and still be strong. His earliest fans often said the same thing. He made me feel seen. And that was perhaps Earth's most extraordinary gift. In a world that tried to make him invisible, he turned the camera around and saw us. He built community out of vulnerability. He gave others permission to be a little louder, a little freer, a little more themselves. And so when we say Earth dreamed, we're not just talking about ambition. We're talking about revolution. The kind of revolution that starts in a child's bedroom and ends with millions of people watching, inspired, feeling a little braver than they were before. Now, a question for you. Have you ever dimmed your light just to make someone else comfortable? Have you ever wished you could live more intensely? Let us know in the comments. Your story could be the voice someone needs today. And don't go anywhere, because his journey has only just begun. He didn't wait for a place. He created his own voice, painted in pastels, lit with pride, and open to anyone who felt left out. In a world where Thai entertainment is still entrenched in tradition, where gender is expected to fit each role and each star is molded into an acceptable ideal, Katsumonat Namurata emerged as a quiet storm. Not loud, not aggressive, not radical by design, but radical by effect. His rise was not the result of controversy or viral shock. It was something much harder to define and much harder to ignore. Authenticity. Earth began not with fame, but with a whisper. While studying at Thammasat University, he began sharing his thoughts online, not through slick campaigns or sensational stories, but through simple, honest YouTube vlogs. He spoke to the camera the way a friend would over a late-night cup of tea, warm, funny, a little cheeky, and deeply sincere. He didn't play a role. He didn't hide his language to avoid scrutiny. And in doing so, he gave voice to a generation of young Thais who had never seen anyone like him on screen. Gentle, open, gay, and fearless. Earth's power doesn't come from being loud. It comes from being consistent. Video after video, he appears as himself, sometimes in a bright pink jacket, sometimes showing bare, vulnerable skin. He plays with fashion in ways that blur boundaries. Dresses with combat boots, eyeliner with soft curls, masculine silhouettes paired with feminine jewelry. For some, it's just style. For others, it's a lifeline. In a country where many LGBT+ people still feel compelled to perform to survive, whether by acting more masculine, more outspoken, or more normal, Earth has become the first widely recognized Thai figure who doesn't perform for anyone but himself. That choice comes with risks. He wasn't protected by a major entertainment company. He wasn't born into wealth or fame. He wasn't cast in a high-budget TV series to establish himself. He built that foundation himself, brick by brick, with content rooted in reality. He talks about being gay, not through metaphor or suggestion, but directly. He talked about heartbreak, about beauty standards, about mental health. He cried on camera when it hurt and laughed freely when it healed. In doing so, Earth taught us what many celebrities are afraid to teach, and that courage was not only inspiring, it was transformative. LGBTQ+ youth across Thailand and beyond began to see themselves in his journey. For some, Earth's videos were the first time they had seen someone who'd edit out their feminine parts to be accepted. Others resonated with his emotional honesty, his stubborn refusal to be taken seriously. Young people wrote to him, "Thanks to you, I went out in a dress for the first time. You made me feel proud to be gay." He was the first Thai creator to make me believe that I didn't have to change to be loved. Earth doesn't preach activism, but his life is activism, just by existing. Gentle, elegant, funny, emotional, and unafraid of being gay, he's broken the unwritten rule that to exist in Thai media, you have to conform, that you have to tone it down, that you have to trade your truth for likes or followers. Earth didn't just reject the system, he built something new. But the road hasn't been smooth. While he's been adored online, many doors in traditional media remain closed. Shows have passed him by. Management companies have looked the other way. Advertisers have hesitated. There's been no loud blacklisting, just quiet resistance to change. But Earth hasn't backed down. He's just gone places. He continues to innovate. He continues to collaborate. He continues to find new ways to reach his audience, even when the mainstream fails to keep up. And when he does step into acting, he brings his whole self to the table. In his LGBTQ-focused dramas and indie films, he not only plays his roles, but he brings them to life with real, living emotion. Unlike the scripted boy-girl love characters, this question, if Earth dared to live fully, despite every reason not to, what's holding you back? Tell us in the comments. Your story matters. Your truth belongs here. Before he was famous, before millions knew his name, before the aura of fame blended into his daily life, there was only Earth, a young man with an open heart, living sincerely in a world that rarely had room for such tenderness. And in the midst of that life, a quiet, lasting love found him. And Jay Chaiwat has appeared Nana. They met not in front of flashing cameras or on an elaborately staged film set, but in real life, unedited, without a script. Jay is not an actor acting. He is genuine, simple. He sees Earth not as a rising star, not as a symbol of LGBTQ+ presence, but simply as a human being, full of dreams, flaws, laughter, and tenderness. That was the beginning. Two hearts met at the right time, before everything became noisy. Their relationship blossomed slowly but surely, like a love that doesn't need a dramatic spark to ignite. They shared dinners on tired nights, long weekend road trips, quiet evenings without phones. Friends talk about how Jay soothed Earth, how Earth lit up Jay. They weren't perfect, but they were genuine. And in a culture where gay couples are often forced into hiding, they did something brave. They lived it out. Fans noticed, not because of a staged couple moment, but because love, when it's genuine, always finds a way to express itself. Earth and Jay appeared at events together, not hand in hand but side by side, with an intimacy that couldn't be faked. Their social media posts weren't declarations but fleeting moments, an arm around a shoulder, a caption that hinted at something more. They weren't trying to be role models, they just tried to be happy. And that, in itself, was revolutionary. They weren't just lovers, they were icons. For 3 remarkable years, Earth Namwarot and Jay Chaiwat shared a love story that transcended life. It wasn't hidden in the shadows. It blossomed openly, documented through photos, moments spent together, and tender words that melted the hearts of thousands. Fans watched them grow not just as individuals, but as a couple that radiated warmth, sincerity, and something unshakably real. They wore matching rings. They called each other husband and wife, with a playful intimacy that deepened beyond most public relationships. Every post, every glance, every quiet gesture hinted at something lasting, something forever. It was the kind of love that made people believe in a happy ending. and maybe many hoped they had sealed it with something more than words. But the truth was quieter. Though their love seemed like a lifelong vow, there was no legal wedding, no formal marriage, just an emotional bond stronger than any piece of paper could ever provide. But peace food doesn't always last forever. People grow up, dreams change, and sometimes two people who love each other deeply wake up one day and realize they are no longer on the same path. No scandals, no betrayals, no angry messages or confusing stories, just a conversation, then another conversation, and finally, a decision. Earth and Jay chose to separate. Not because they didn't love each other anymore, but because they had come to love themselves enough to know when to let go. Earth doesn't hide the breakup. He doesn't dramatize it. Instead, he opens up about has defined his career. He says it was a match, that it was timing, that they both had dreams that pulled them in different directions, and most of all, that he will always be grateful. It's a rare ending, mature, respectful, not bitter. A breakup isn't a failure, it's a graduation. Earth showed the world that gay love stories don't have to end in shame or silence, that there's respect in deep love and dignity in a gracious breakup. And for fans, especially queer fans across Asia, this is more than just a celebrity romance. It's a journey. Proof that LGBTQ+ relationships are just as real, just as layered, just as worthy of being told in their entirety, not just their happy beginnings, but their heartfelt endings. Earth's story with Jay reminds us that love doesn't have to last forever to be life-changing. Sometimes it comes into our lives to teach us something about trust, about growing up, about opening up to someone. And when the time comes, that love teaches us how to let go. So let me ask you, our audience, have you ever loved someone knowing that one day you might have to let them go? Would you do it all over again if it meant being the person you are today? We'd love to hear what you think. Leave your thoughts in the comments. This space is yours too, to feel, to share, to be seen. What happens when someone who once loved passionately chooses to live quietly? When a soul who once made a home in another's heart learns to live alone, not just to survive, but to truly thrive. That's the chapter Katsumanot Earth Namorode entered after his long-term relationship ended. And it didn't start with sadness. It started with serenity. For years, Earth was a model of gentle devotion. Fans who followed him saw not just a rising actor, but a man unafraid to love openly in a world that often requires LGBTQ+ people to hide. His vulnerability became a beacon, his tenderness a kind of resistance. But even the brightest love can fade. When the relationship ended, Earth didn't retreat into silence. He didn't collapse. He simply matured. The pain of a heartbreak, when carried deeply, doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like going to bed a little earlier, like journaling more, posting less, smiling softly instead of trying too hard. Earth embraced that healing. He chose maturity over gossip, silence over show. In an industry obsessed with speed and superficiality, he slowed down and dug deeper. What he found in that silence wasn't emptiness, it was clarity. In interviews, Earth began to reveal a deeper philosophy, one that doesn't put happiness above romance. He talked about the value of solitude, about learning to accept discomfort instead of rushing to find a replacement, about choosing wholeness, even when the world tells you you're not whole without someone. And through it all, his message remained gentle but consistent. You don't have to be in love to feel whole. This isn't bitterness, this is maturity. A quiet courage built from years of loving others, and finally turning that love inward. Earth began to reclaim the parts of himself he had lost. He became more proactive in his creative work. His online content felt more grounded, more authentic, more him. Less showy, but more present. Whether he was sharing a candid moment in his garden or reflecting on a simple coffee purchase, it all made sense. It was as if he was saying, "I'm not acting for the camera. I'm showing you how I live." And people noticed, not just diehard fans or casual viewers, but people quietly rebuilding their lives. People experiencing heartbreak, burnout, or the quiet pain of starting over. They saw a mirror of their own silent struggles. He didn't preach or make grand pronouncements. He simply showed up, with sincerity, with tenderness. And somehow, that was enough. His voice became a quiet hymn for the broken and the recovering alike. A quiet reassurance. You don't have to be fixed. You don't have to be with someone to be whole. You already whole. He never needed flowery words to make his point. Every detail, his fashion, his tone, the moments he chose to share, was carefully considered. His silence was intentional. After breaking free from the BL couple image that had been associated with him, the world not only moved on, but he reclaimed his own space. He was no longer defined by a couple, but began to live as a whole person in his own right. Not half of someone, but a whole person. And in a culture that still clings to the ideal of being part of a couple, his choice to live alone was not only brave, but quietly groundbreaking. But even when alone, Earth never wallows in isolation. There's a quiet wisdom to the way he interacts, with an unobtrusive but intentional extroversion. Instead, he builds connection through sincerity. His captions read like quiet reflections. His public moments, though brief, feel intimate, as if he's not just performing, but gently inviting us to witness his growth. In a world that's constantly chasing the next relationship or openly nursing heartbreaks, Earth offers something rare: emotional elegance. He doesn't weaponize the past, he honors it, he lets it breathe, and then, with grace, he releases it. He moves forward unbroken, unscathed, just whole, just steady, alone, yes, but never really alone. So maybe the lesson here isn't about romance at all. Maybe Earth's greatest love story is the one he writes himself. A story about patience, about presence, about the quiet joy that doesn't need validation, approval, or another person to complete the picture. Just space, just time, just truth. And now we want to ask you, have you ever been through a phase like Earth? A moment in your life where you had to stand up, not because someone else reached out, but because you chose to stand up? Leave a comment below. Let your story be heard, because somewhere there might be someone walking by, feeling a little lost, and your words might be the reminder they need. Being alone doesn't mean you're broken. Sometimes it means you're finally complete. In an industry often defined by silence, where authenticity is filtered through a corporate lens and LGBTQ+ identity is hidden behind coded performances, Katsumona Earth Namworot stands out as a quiet revolutionary, a Thai actor who chose to live his truth, not through sensational headlines, but with his heart. He didn't come out in the dramatic way the media wanted him to. Instead, he simply lived his true self. Openly gay, expressing himself fearlessly and compassionately. That choice, to exist without apology, has made Earth not just a beloved actor, but a symbol of gay joy and liberation. From the beginning, Earth's public presence was not just entertainment, it was a movement. In a country where LGBTQ+ rights are still being negotiated, Earth has used his platform to elevate queer stories with authenticity and dignity. Whether starring in a BL drama or posting his honest reflections online, Earth has never separated his identity from his art. His Instagram is more than a carefully curated aesthetic. It's a space where love and self-expression run wild. In his captions, he talks about empathy. In his photos, he challenges gender norms. In his everyday life, he quietly refuses to shrink to please anyone. Over the years, Earth has become an active and visible participant at Thailand's Pride festivals, not just as a celebrity guest, but as an active voice. He marched. He spoke. He has stood side by side with grassroots activists fighting for legal equality, transgender rights, and protections against discrimination. At Bangkok Pride and other LGBTQ+ events, Earth is often seen not in VIP booths but among people, taking photos, exchanging hugs, and amplifying the community's voices. For him, advocacy is not a trend. It's a thread that runs through everything he touches. One of the most striking aspects of Earth's contribution to the queer community is how he redefined masculinity. On red carpets, he's been photographed in genderless outfits, lace tops, painted nails, and sheer fabrics, without flaunting them. It's not pretense. It's not shock value. It's Earth. And in doing so, he's opened the door for a generation of young Thai men who were once told that their softness made them weak. His very existence says otherwise. Your softness is strength. Your femininity is not weakness. You don't have to be anything else to be loved. But Earth doesn't stop at symbolism. He speaks up. strong when necessary. In interviews, when asked about LGBTQ+ themes in his work, he never shies away. He leans forward. He talks about the importance of telling queer stories that are not fantasy but reality. He advocates for more nuanced representation, stories that go beyond stereotypes and touch the soul. And in a media landscape that is still reluctant to embrace queer truths, that stance is nothing short of revolutionary. He has also collaborated with LGBTQ+ creatives, photographers, and stylists, actively creating space for LGBTQ+ voices in his art world. In an interview, a young gay stylist spoke of Earth not just as a client, but as a partner. He listens, they said. He lets me create without judgment. That small moment speaks volumes. Earth isn't just theoretical. He creates real opportunities, real beliefs, and real change. So it's no surprise that many fans now call him the icon of gay joy. Not because he tries to be perfect, but because he shows that gay life doesn't have to be all struggle and heartache. It can be laughter, romance, beauty, peace. That message is rare and so necessary. Unlike many public figures who carefully avoid labels, Earth has always been clear: he is gay. But he has never let that singular fact define him. He is not a gay actor. He is a talented actor who is also gay. Someone who brings his whole self to the screen, to the stage, to the world. And that distinction is important. It creates space for others to follow, without fear that their identity will be all anyone sees. For queer fans across Thailand and beyond, Earth is more than just a beloved celebrity or BL fan. He's a ray of light in the darkness, a reminder that self-love is possible, that you can be beautiful and flawed, gentle and brave, emotional and proud, all at the same time. He doesn't preach. He doesn't politicize. He simply shows who he is. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing a person can do. Have you ever met someone, online or in person, who made you feel seen? Who helped you feel safe in your own skin, maybe for the first time? If Earth is that person for you, or if you found your own path to self-love, we invite you to share in the comments. Your story could change someone's life. Because at the end of the day, queer joy isn't just Earth's story, it's our story. And the world is better when we tell it together. There is a quiet power in a man who refuses to shrink. In the face of stereotypes, cultural expectations, and centuries of silence, Katsamona Earth Namwirot did something revolutionary. He chose to be true to himself. And in doing so, he became more than just an actor, a public figure. He became a mirror for a generation still struggling to figure out how to love, how to heal, how to survive, and how to dream without fear. Earth's journey didn't begin with a flashy headline or a dramatic announcement. It began with something much rarer: quiet authenticity. From his earliest roles to his true self, Earth has never played hide-and-seek. He has never blurred his truth to fit the market or made himself bland for comfort. And perhaps that's what makes him so compelling. In a space where so many LGBTQ+ artists are told to be careful, discreet, or silent, Earth steps into the light with a calm, steady presence. He doesn't need to shout to be heard. His honesty, his openness, they're heartwarming. To witness Earth's love story with Jay Chaiwat unfold, in real time, over the years, on social media and in public appearances, is to witness a tenderness that the world doesn't often extend to young gay couples. It's not just sweet, it's necessary. Their relationship, their openness, their laughter, and even their struggles show what authentic gay love can be. They show us not a fantasy, but a human story. And when that story ends, Earth doesn't pretend. He doesn't erase the past. He carries it with care, allowing himself to grieve and allowing others to see that pain is part of the journey. That's what makes his presence so powerful. Earth never needed to be perfect. He chose to be authentic. In doing so, he became a role model for so many people who needed one. For kids who are still afraid to say I'm gay, for teens in small towns who think their stories don't matter, for anyone who has ever loved and lost and thought they couldn't make it, Earth is a reminder that they can. That we all can. His presence isn't loud, but it resonates. In every DM, every letter, every fan who whispers, "Because of you, I believe I can be me." And Earth's influence extends beyond romance. He represents something deeper. the right to exist with tenderness in a world that worships hardness, the freedom to feel without shame. He doesn't try to be the loudest or the most popular. He tries to be the most authentic, and that authenticity transcends borders, languages, and communities. In his smile, there is recognition. In his voice, there is protection. He's not just speaking up, he's holding space for those still searching for their own. We often talk about representation as a political act, but Earth reminds us that sometimes just being alive, loving, hurting, healing, and moving on is the most radical thing. He doesn't claim to represent everyone, but in the way he moves through the world, he gently says, "You are not alone." And for so many, that's all it is. And that's the real heart of this story. Earth doesn't just show us how to love. He shows us how to accept loss, how to stand up, and how to continue to believe in the beauty of existence. For many young queer people watching from the shadows, Earth is the first time they've seen someone like themselves not just exist, but thrive. Not just accepted, but celebrated. His success isn't built on controversy or clickbait. It's built on steadfastness, compassion, and a quiet resilience that never fades. He reminds us that healing is never linear, and identity is not a destination. It's a lifelong dance. He doesn't ask you to be brave. He asks you to show up. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show up for who you are. And when someone like Earth chooses to live that way, in public, without pretense, it sends a message more powerful than any words, that your truth is enough, your story matters, and maybe, just maybe, the world is ready for all of you. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible, insecure, or unworthy, remember Earth. Remember her strength, not because she never falls, but because she always gets back up. This is a reminder to you. You are seen, you are valuable, and your freedom begins the moment you decide to live your true self without regret. Now it's your turn. Leave a comment below. What part of Earth's journey has moved you the its? If Katsumana Namurote's story reminds you that it's okay to be light, feel deeply, and live life to the fullest, then maybe it's not just Earth's story. Maybe it's your story too. Because in a world that often demands we hide, Earth shows us the power of being seen, unapologetically, honestly, and beautifully as human beings. Thank you for watching. If this journey has touched your heart, inspired you, or made you feel less alone, we invite you to support this channel by liking, subscribing, and exploring the other stories we've shared. And most of all, we'd love to hear from you. Leave your thoughts in the comments. What part of Earth's journey has touched your heart? Your voice matters, just like Earth's. What if the quietest boy in the room became the voice of a generation? Before the viral love story, before the breakup heard across Asia, there was just both. A soft-spoken kid with a camera, a dream, and a heart too big to hide. His journey isn't loud, but it's unforgettable. Stay with us because this isn't just a story about love. It's about how being gentle can start a revolution. In a sleepy town deep in the southern corner of Thailand, long before the headlines, the heartache, or the hope he would one day bring to millions, there was just one boy named Both. Born Natapong Chinsaponsap, he grew up amid palm trees, gentle monsoon rains, and the steady rhythm of rural life. His home was modest but filled with warmth. His parents worked hard, instilling in him the values of humility, kindness, and respect. But even as a child, Both had something that made him different. A quietness, a gentleness, a kind of emotional sensitivity that didn't quite fit in with the world around him. From the beginning, it was clear that Both was different. While other kids climbed trees and played on the ground, he preferred quiet spaces. He would sit alone with his thoughts, drawing, daydreaming, watching the clouds change shape. He didn't talk much, but when he did, there was a quiet intelligence in his words. He was gentle, observant, and sensitive to the moods of those around him. He could sense sadness before it was expressed. He consoled before anyone asked. Teachers called him mature for his age. But really, he was just trying to understand the world in a way that made him feel safe. Growing up in a traditional Thai family meant learning the unspoken rules early on. Boys were expected to be strong, tough, stoic. Any sign of weakness was quietly questioned. Although his family never said it out loud, both could feel the pressure. To be more direct, he had to be more assertive, he had to act like a boy. He tried, but pretending was never right. The more he tried to hide who he really was, the more invisible he became to himself. And yet, even in the face of that quiet erasure, he was always kind. He was always curious. He found joy in the smallest things. The sound of rain on the roof, the color of light through the window, the magic of a well-told story. That was where his refuge began, with stories. At night, after homework and chores, both would retreat into other worlds. He was addicted to movies, TV series, cartoons, anything that brought him emotion and meaning. He didn't watch for the action or the fantasy. He watched for the truth. He sought out characters who made him feel like himself, even if they weren't meant to. A girl in a TV series hiding her secret. A lonely boy in a foreign film searches for connection. Somewhere in the fictional world, he finds pieces of himself reflected. As the years passed, both began to dream, not just of enjoying stories, but of creating them. He wrote scripts in the margins of his notebooks, imagined conversations on the school bus. He didn't know it yet, but these were the seeds of a future career and a future identity. He only knew that telling stories made him feel alive. It was the only place he didn't have to explain himself. But real life was harder. The school hallways echoed with whispers. He was too weak, too quiet, too different. And even though he never came out in public during his early years, people sensed something they didn't understand. And sometimes, they turned that confusion into cruelty. Both never fought back with words. He bore it silently, but not bitterly. That's what made him remarkable. Instead of being tough, he deepened. Instead of running from his vulnerability, he let it anchor him. What most people miss is that both isn't lost. He's listening, absorbing, becoming. And then, a light bulb went off. A borrowed camera, a laptop, a YouTube account with barely any followers. It didn't look like much, but to both, it was everything. It was a window, a mirror, a stage. When he first filmed himself, he wasn't trying to be famous. He was just trying to tell the truth in a way he could never say out loud. Little sketches, video diaries, honest thoughts wrapped in humor. They were simple, quiet, but real. And for the first time, strangers started commenting, "I feel the same way." That connection, the invisible thread between his story and the pain, joy, longing of others, was addictive. It was healing. Both had been quiet, but now people were listening. And what they heard was the voice of someone who had never really been allowed to speak. He didn't know it yet, but those first shaky videos were the beginning of something much bigger than him. They were the first steps on a journey that would one day reshape the way millions of people see love, weirdness, and tenderness, not as weaknesses, but as gifts. Who could have known this quiet boy from the South would one day define what love means for millions? And now that you've heard where his story begins, how did it make you feel? Did you see a part of yourself in him? Did his silence remind you of your own? When both left his hometown to pursue higher education, he made no secret of his past and quietly walked the path toward his purpose in life. He enrolled in Silpakorn University, one of Thailand's most prestigious art schools, majoring in film and digital media. For a boy raised in a fictional world, this was more than just a major. It was a calling. He wasn't trying to be popular, he was trying to be heard. Bangkok was a shock to the system. The quiet trees and slow mornings were gone. Now all that remained were night buses, part-time jobs, and the constant buzz of a city that never stopped moving. Both worked hard to make ends meet, editing wedding videos, filming student projects, bartending part-time just to survive. His schedule was chaotic, sleep was often an afterthought, and ramen noodles became a regular meal. But even as his body was exhausted, his heart was bright. Every spare moment he had, he spent telling stories. And one night, with a used laptop and a borrowed camera from a classmate, he quietly uploaded his first YouTube video. It was simple, personal, just his thoughts, filmed in his tiny dorm room. But that video became the seed for something much bigger. It wasn't the production value that caught people's attention. It was the authenticity. It was the soft voice behind the camera that made viewers feel like he was talking to them, not at them. And slowly, the group of strangers became a small community, a place where people didn't just watch, they felt. And then, the moment that changed everything. It was a warm afternoon at a school festival, one of those colorful, bustling events filled with laughter, music, and familiar faces. Both, now a former student, had returned to visit his old school. Meanwhile, on stage, a student named Katsamona Namwirot, nicknamed New Year, was hosting the event as the MC. Dressed neatly, articulate, and confident, New Year had the crowd hooked. But for both, it wasn't just his voice or stage presence. It was something different, something intimate. Like a moment in the universe, he chose not to shout, but to whisper, "Look, he's right there." And the funny thing is, New Year noticed him too. They didn't talk that day, but a glance was enough. That night, New Year found both on Instagram and followed him. They both followed back. And just like that, two gentle guys with cameras and dreams, they started talking. Slowly at first, then endlessly. Direct messages turned into deep conversations, comments turned into confessions. And in just a few weeks, a quiet connection became undeniable. They didn't just discover each other, they recognized something familiar in each other. A reflection, a tenderness, a security. They officially started dating in 2012. It wasn't a dramatic reveal, no fireworks, no declarations, just sincerity, just heart. What's more, their families knew from the start, and what's more, they supported them. But there was one condition. At the time, New Year was 17, still in school, still growing up. So his parents, like both's parents, made a simple request: keep the relationship light. Keep it light. And both absolutely respects that. What blossomed between them wasn't rushed, it was careful, intentional, built not just on attraction, but on mutual respect and shared dreams. They were students, they were creators, and most of all, they felt safe with each other. In a world that often demanded performance, they found peace in their own presence, and that authenticity became their magic. Their relationship began with a shared passion for storytelling. Short films, vlogs, conversations about love, fear, identity. Their channels grew slowly, then suddenly. Viewers were drawn in not by the flashiness, but by the purity. These weren't performances, they were glimpses of something real. In a country where same-sex love is often hidden or ridiculed, both and New Year have shown something rare. Tenderness, stability, a love that doesn't flare up and then fade, it lasts. And for LGBTQ+ youth across Thailand and beyond, it has changed their lives. The comments speak for themselves. This is the first time I've seen love like this that's not shameful. You guys made me believe in slow love. My parents started accepting me because of your videos. They're not just creating content, they're quietly building a space where love can breathe, where queer young people can see themselves reflected not as a tragedy, but as a possibility. Both. The quiet boy who once wondered if he was too weak for the world is now half of a story that empowers tenderness, that reframes tenderness as strength. And the Earth, New Year, is the mirror that helps him shine. But what about you? Have you ever made eye contact with someone and felt the world shift, even just a little? Have you ever followed someone online and ended up finding a piece of yourself? If this story stirs something in your heart, we want to hear it. Leave your thoughts in the comments, because every love story starts somewhere. And this is just the beginning. When people look back at long-term relationships, they often ask, when did it become real? For both and Earth, the answer wasn't a grand gesture. It was the quiet consistency that followed. After that first connection online, what grew between them wasn't instant fireworks. It was a slow, steady flame that never burned out. What began as late-night conversations slowly bloomed into something that felt like home. By the end of 2012, their bond had quietly solidified. Earth was still navigating high school life, while both juggled university and part-time work. But in between assignments and obligations, they chose each other. Not with drama, but with intention. There was no rush, no pressure, just a mutual understanding that what they had was rare. And so began a love that would last 12 years. For the public, it started later, but for both, it was years of building something away from the spotlight. They spoke in codes, they held hands in shadows, but it was always safe in their world. Over time, they emerged, slowly, then all at once. Fans began calling them both New Year, a name that combined their hearts and lives. And suddenly, both was no longer just a storyteller. He was one half of a symbol. Travel became their love language. From Japan to Hong Kong, from China to the UK, they explored the world hand in hand, documenting sunsets, coffees, and Disneyland visits like postcards from a dream. Both's minimalist style, white shirts, black cardigans, contrasted Earth's pastel tones and vibrant energy. Their outfits matched often, but never felt forced. They just looked like two people deeply in sync, dressing for the day and for each other. Both wasn't a loud person. He never chased attention. He worked behind the scenes, behind the camera, framing Earth with tenderness, letting the lens tell stories words couldn't. But when they decided to create together, their work became something else entirely. Short films like Right Person, Wrong Time, and The Sign weren't just scripts. They were fragments of truth. In 2021, Top Secret Together brought them to national attention. The show was praised not for performance, but for its authenticity. It was the first time both and Earth kissed on screen, and for many, it was the first time they'd seen two Thai men love each other without shame. Both's strength was never loud. It was quiet dignity. He never claimed to be an activist, but through every frame he directed, every caption he posted, he became one. Without preaching, he showed what real, lasting queer love could look like. He gave it visibility, respect, and permanence. In a region where LGBTQ+ representation is still emerging, that matters. But more than the films or the fame, it was the small things that defined him. His camera lingering on Earth just a little longer than necessary, fixing a collar between takes, capturing the way Earth laughed, or the way they looked at each other when they thought no one else was watching. Both wasn't just documenting love, he was preserving it. The journey wasn't without its weight. As their popularity grew, so did the expectations. Every public post was scrutinized, every silence interpreted. But through it all, both kept his focus, not on proving anything, but on protecting what they'd built. To the world, they were half both New Year. To him, it was simply love, one worth guarding. 12 years is more than a relationship, it's a life. They grew together, matured together, healed together. Through school, career leaps, private struggles, and moments of triumph, they remained. And through it all, both never stopped choosing Earth. Not for attention, not for image, but for love. And perhaps what set both apart was that he never tried to make it look perfect. He allowed the cracks to show, the pauses, the tired days, the realness. In a world so obsessed with curated love stories, both gave us something more honest, vulnerability. And from that vulnerability, he created beauty. So when we remember this love, we must also remember the man who held the camera, who stood behind the light, who never made himself the center, but made sure the story was seen. The man who believed in quiet devotion, who gave us 12 years of truth through laughter, travel, art, and presence. Do you still believe in love after 12 years? Because both, through everything, never stopped showing us how it's done. By the time the world realized both Anatapong was gay, he didn't have to come out. He lived his life, in every frame, every story, every quiet moment shared with the Earth. No viral posts, no dramatic announcements, no rainbow-colored PR. Because for Botha, being gay wasn't just a performance, it was simply a part of who he was. This quiet, unspoken courage became the most powerful statement. While many public figures struggle under pressure, calculating when, how, or even if they can live out their lives, both gently refused to make his identity a headline. He just lived, and in doing so, he redefined what it meant to be seen. For more than a decade, fans have watched him see the Earth from behind the lens, the way he celebrated their anniversaries without hiding, the way he made films that didn't just feature gay characters, but put them front and center in stories filled with tenderness, skepticism, joy, and hope. It wasn't just a show. It was a quiet revolution, His coming out, if you can call it that, was never a single moment. It was 1,000 small choices. The choice not to lie when asked about his partner. The choice to post an unedited photo of the Earth on their anniversary. The choice to post a photo of two men cooking dinner together, or curling up on the couch, or holding hands in the middle of a crowded festival. These weren't flashy gestures. They were radical in their normality. When their love story was made public, the reactions came flooding in. Young people from Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines, and elsewhere shared how both and Earth had given them a new image. You helped me come out to my parents. You made me believe that our love was valid. For the first time, I saw myself in someone who wasn't a joke or a tragedy. But not all the voices were kind. In a culture where conservative norms still cast a shadow over life, there were critics. People who called their content inappropriate or too much. Trolls insisted they were setting a bad example. But both never let that hate change his tone. He didn't defend himself, not because he didn't care, but because he knew his existence didn't need to be defended. He responded to ignorance with art. He faced cruelty with clarity. In interviews, when asked about his sexuality, both never faltered. He smiled softly and spoke of love, of sincerity, of the beauty of living fearlessly. "I don't want to be remembered as a gay filmmaker," he said. "I just want to be someone who makes people feel seen." And that's exactly who he became. He used his growing platform to advocate for LGBTQ+ causes, not with performative hashtags, but with real action. He attended pride events. He spoke at conferences. He donated to mental health programs for gay people. He collaborated with young gay creatives trying to break into the film industry. He lent his name to projects that amplified voices often silenced in Thai media. He even co-directed a short film that captured the silent pain of coming out in a traditional family, which was later used in schools and counseling centers across Thailand. Throughout that time, both never lost sight of his core mission, storytelling, not for attention, but for connection. His work with Earth continues to thrive. Their vlogs, films, and behind-the-scenes moments show a genuine relationship, not perfect, but built on trust and growing together. Through these stories, they give the next generation of LGBTQ+ youth something they rarely saw growing up: hope. Both doesn't conform to stereotypes. He doesn't chase clicks. He doesn't code his love to make it more acceptable. He has created a space in Thai media where same-sex love can be gentle, intimate, even mundane. And that's revolutionary. Because sometimes seeing two men folding laundry together is more radical than any pride parade. And gradually, his name has become more than just that of a filmmaker. It has become an icon. Today, Both is seen not only as a talented creator, but also as a mirror, reflecting the lives, dreams, and struggles of young gay people who once thought they were alone. For many, he is an unsung hero, a reminder that presence doesn't always resonate. Sometimes it's just a whisper. His legacy isn't built on viral moments. It's built on years of honesty, of showing up, of speaking the truth without apology. In a region where many still live in silence, Both's existence is an invitation. You can live and you can love out loud. He didn't just represent himself. He represented the possibility of a life not defined by fear, but by freedom. For more than a decade, Both Anatapong Chinsapansap has been known as more than just a content creator or filmmaker. He was one half of a love story that millions of people followed like a fairy tale. His relationship with Earth Katsumonat Namurot became a symbol of hope, especially for LGBTQ+ youth across Asia. Together, they redefined same-sex love, lasting, inspiring, and deeply human. But in February 2025, that fairy tale ended, and the ripple effects spread far beyond Thailand. On the evening of February 15th, Earth posted a heartfelt message on Instagram that took fans completely by surprise. In a gentle yet heavy tone, he revealed that he and Both had gone their separate ways more than 2 months earlier. It wasn't a joint statement, it was a confession. Earth admitted to breaking a key agreement between them, citing other issues as contributing factors. He apologized to Both and the fans who had supported them throughout their 12-year journey. His final words, "I am completely at fault for this," were both brave and heartbreaking. The shockwaves were immediate. Fans across Southeast Asia reacted with disbelief, grief, and disappointment. The comment section was flooded with crying emojis, broken hearts, and long, mournful messages. Many couldn't understand how a newly engaged couple could break up so suddenly. Others expressed anger, not just at the end, but at what they saw as a betrayal. Speculation spiked when photos emerged of Earth studying abroad in London, often appearing affectionate with a new foreign friend. To some, it felt like he had been working through his emotions long before he announced the split. Throughout, both remained calm. He didn't make a public fuss. He didn't post cryptic messages or subtle taunts. He didn't even offer a rebuttal. Instead, he maintained a quiet dignity. He thanked Earth for their years together and expressed gratitude to the fans who had stuck by them. His silence wasn't indifference, it was grace. It was the kind of strength that doesn't scream, but resonates. For both, this wasn't just the end of a romantic relationship. It was the disintegration of a shared public identity that had been cultivated for more than a decade. From viral vlogs to heartfelt short films like Our Story, Signs, and Right Person, Wrong Time, the couple brought visibility and recognition to LGBTQ+ audiences who rarely saw themselves reflected in love stories that ended happily. Their work was more than just art, it was advocacy. In many ways, their breakup felt like the end of an era, but it wasn't the end of hope. Memories of their journey still live online. The smiles, the glances, the playful banter, the heartfelt conversations, they're still there. Fans continue to revisit those moments, not just for nostalgia, but as a form of healing. Those digital memories now serve as a reminder of what it once was, a love that blossomed openly, bravely, and beautifully in the spotlight. And while Earth's public apology only scratched the surface of his pain, both's quiet suffering spoke volumes. He didn't let his bitterness cloud his next chapter. Instead, he focused on what he does best, telling meaningful stories. Since his split, he's continued to champion LGBTQ+ stories, donate his platform to LGBTQ+ causes, and support youth mental health initiatives. He's shown the world that heartbreak doesn't have to mean destruction. It can be a gateway to reinvention. The dignity with which they both weathered the storm became a lesson in emotional maturity. He didn't erase the past, he embraced it. He didn't weaponize the pain, he transformed it. And in doing so, he showed that endings, no matter how painful, can also be beginnings. He also provided something incredibly rare in the world of influencer culture, an example of how to separate personal truth from public spectacle. He allowed people to feel the pain, yes, but also witness the healing. And perhaps that's the real love story here. Not just the story he shared with the Earth, but the story he continues to build with himself. 12 years is a long time. Enough time to grow together, to build dreams together, to weather storms together. And while their story didn't end with a wedding or a happily ever after, it did end with honesty, with responsibility, with love. Not the romantic kind, but the resilient kind. The kind of letting go with respect. Nadapong continues to move forward, not as one half of a celebrity couple, but as a whole person who has loved deeply, lost deeply, and still believes in beauty. He doesn't need a partner to complete his story. He is the story, because sometimes the most powerful love stories don't end forever, but they still change the world. In the months following the public breakup, many fans wondered, where would both Nadapong Chinsapansap go from here? After all, for over a decade, he had not only lived and loved in the public eye, but he had also created alongside the person he once considered his forever. The question lingered, could someone who gave so much of himself to a shared dream now find purpose walking alone? The answer came quietly and gracefully. Both didn't disappear. He didn't spiral or shut down. Instead, he did what he had always done best. He created. With the same quiet strength that had carried him through the most vulnerable years of his life, he began to rebuild. Not from ashes, but from wisdom. And though Earth was no longer beside him, both stood tall. His posture was different, a little heavier with memory, but no less proud. He focused on solo projects, short films that explored themes of resilience, heartbreak, healing. One particularly moving project portrayed a man learning to fall in love with solitude after losing someone he once believed would stay forever. Fans immediately saw the parallels, but the message was universal. This wasn't a story of bitterness. It was about the soft power of letting go. Both also continued his advocacy, working with LGBTQ+ organizations in Thailand and beyond. He spoke on panels about queer representation, mental health, and the emotional labor of being visible. But what made his presence so powerful wasn't the grandeur. It was the authenticity. He wasn't trying to be perfect, he was trying to be real. And in that space of honesty, he gave permission to others to do the same. There were moments when fans speculated about a new love, a possible chapter 2. But both kept those parts of his life private. If there was someone new, he chose not to center them in the public eye. At least, not yet. Maybe he was still healing. Maybe he had learned that some things bloom best when they're not on display. Either way, fans respected his silence, knowing that healing isn't linear, and that moving forward doesn't always mean moving on. Instead, he channeled his energy into something bigger than personal recovery. He began mentoring young creators, queer kids who grew up watching him and Earth and now wanted to tell their own stories. He reviewed scripts, offered production advice, even hosted small workshops. Slowly, his legacy shifted from one of visibility to one of stewardship. He wasn't just representing anymore, he was uplifting. And perhaps that's the most powerful transformation of all. Because even without Earth by his side, both never stopped walking with pride. He never stopped shining. He never once allowed the heartbreak to harden him, or the public scrutiny to break him. He carried the lessons of his love forward, not as scars but as stars, markers of a life lived bravely, out loud, and with tenderness. His fans remained loyal, not because he was flawless, but because he was honest. Not because he gave them a happy ending, but because he gave them something real. A love story that was imperfect, but full of grace. A breakup that was painful, but mature. A man who kept choosing to show up, not for applause, but for purpose. And today, both's name means more than just the half of a famous couple. It means strength, it means endurance. It means staying soft in a world that wants you to be hard. It means telling stories that matter. And for every queer youth who's afraid they won't be loved. Both's story whispers, you will be. And even if the love doesn't last forever, that doesn't make it any less true. Because real love, whether romantic, platonic, or self-love, leaves something behind. It builds people, it builds cultures, it builds bridges. And that's what Both has done. Brick by brick, moment by moment, video by video. He built something that will outlive the relationship itself. He built a movement. Even without Earth by his side, Both continues to walk with pride, with grace, and with love. Because some people are born not to fit in, but to shine. And what about you? How do you see Both now? After all the love, the loss, and the quiet strength he's shown. What did their 12-year story mean to you? Did it break your heart or help you believe in love, even if it doesn't last forever? Share your feelings below. We're reading every word because some stories live on in all of us. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of Both Nadapong. More than a dentist, more than a filmmaker, he reminds us that healing doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it's quiet, peaceful, and full of emotion. If his story touches you, let us know in the comments. What inspired you the most? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And this is just the beginning.